Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, Scott Wurtzbacher, and today we're going to talk about the path from survival to success and significance. And for today's guest, that path literally begins with the teaching of survival skills. Wilderness survival instructor, author, and television host Creek Stewart is with us today. Creek is the author of over 20 books on survival and preparedness. He is the in-house survival expert at the Weather Channel and has hosted 3 television shows, including Could You Survive with Creek Stewart, SOS How to Survive, and Fat Guys in the Woods. He's been featured on countless media outlets, including The Today Show, Fox and Friends, Inside Edition, and many more. Creek's story starts with survival and winds through an amazing journey that includes personal transformation and opening up to a greater connection in nature. I am so excited and honored to share his story with you today. Creek, welcome to the campfire.
Hey, great to be here. This is my place, the Inspire Campfire. This is great. I'm excited.
Well, you know, it's so funny. I'm excited just to hear you say that, because I want to, as we jump in here, I want to start right off with your vision statement, because so much of that vision statement, when I read that, it just like resonated with me and with the mission of this podcast. I just love it so much. And I'm just going to start by reading your most recent mission statement, and we can kind of dive into that. But on your website, your mission statement, your vision statement is, if you deny yourself the connection to the wild places that your soul craves, the fire inside of you will slowly turn to ash. I mean, that's powerful stuff. Can you talk us through what that means to you?
I believe that we all came from wild places. You know, I believe that that's where the origin of man began, was in a wild garden. I think I'm not alone in the pursuit of a connection to nature. Everyone feels the call of the wild, man and woman, at some point, and maybe they can't quite understand what that means. But in my book, it's just our DNA trying to get back to the places we came from, and that's home. You know, I mean, the origin of man doesn't begin in a building or a city. The origin of man begins in nature, and even though it's been a long time, that is still very much runs in our blood.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. You talk about the fire inside of you.
Yeah.
And then you talk about that fire slowly turning into ash. Can you talk about that fire inside of you?
I believe that a connection to nature keeps us going, you know, and a connection to the creator that created nature. And we'll get into that, you know, the more we talk here. But I believe that we are in a constant search for fulfillment and, you know, satisfaction in life and impact in life. And I've learned in my experience that those things are very much interconnected with the natural world. And it's experiences in nature that really keep that fire ablaze. And I believe that the more someone denies themselves experiences, meaningful experiences in nature, that fire just kind of slowly dies out, you know? And I think that you can see that in people these days. You know, they're searching and they're wandering like, man, I'm chasing all this stuff and I just don't feel fulfilled. And, you know, sometimes we're just looking in the wrong places.
Yeah. I mean, you're Creek Stewart, so we're just diving right in and we're going deep right from the beginning. So I appreciate that. You know, there's a call in that. I mean, this idea that if you don't nurture that fire inside you, your vision statement is that it will slowly turn to ash. And you just spoke to that a little bit. You've got a lot of experience with this, with people firsthand and witnessing that fire turning into ash. Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, a big part of my career, you know, I've been teaching wilderness survival skills for over 2 decades, over 25 years. And, I've had a lot of phases in that process, but for a huge portion of my career, I saw myself as a wilderness survival instructor that not only taught wilderness survival skills, but took people out into the outdoors to experience some type of personal transformation. I learned early on teaching classes that people didn't really come to my survival classes to learn survival skills. It was the weirdest. It was the weirdest revelation to me. You think that people were coming just to learn how to make fire, but it wasn't that. It was that plus something else. They wanted to unplug from their stressful job. Maybe they just got out of a divorce and they wanted something different. They wanted a kick in the pants. They wanted to face Mother Nature and see if they could come out on top. They thought that maybe it was survival skills that was the avenue to that. And I've seen so I spent a long time bringing people out into the woods so that, they could experience nature, be encouraged by nature, overcome some hurdles, change perspective, bring about appreciation, and just have a profound experience in the wilderness that was life-changing. And that literally I could watch ignite something inside of them. They would come to my courses feeling a little bit beat down, and over a period of time in the wilderness and some struggle in the process, you would think that would wear them out, but it never does. It always recharges them to take on life. And I always thought that was really interesting, that despite the fact that they're typically hungry, cold, tired, horrible sleeping conditions, and all of those things, they are recharged in the process. And there is something very powerful in that.
So what I'm kind of hearing you say is they come to you through survival skills, but they also come to you with something else that they're looking for, whether they know it or not. And so maybe it's some sort of a struggle that they're dealing with. And just to kind of recap what I think I just heard you say, they basically come to you with a struggle and they use struggle to get through the struggle.
Yeah, I know, right? I've learned that by teaching survival skills, there's something very unique and profound about the struggle. Okay. When you struggle to meet your own basic human survival needs in nature, even if it's only for a few days, you struggle to get water, you struggle to stay warm, you struggle to build your shelter, you struggle to find food. But I'll tell you what, that struggle brings about an incredible appreciation and change of perspective for all the things that we have back at home. Not a single person that has ever taken a survival course from me has, leaves feeling like they don't appreciate what they have at home more. I love that. I absolutely love that. And what's even more powerful is that perspective not only brings about appreciation, but it brings about fulfillment. When you sleep in a shelter that you built next to a fire that you made, and you're eating a meal, despite how horrible it might taste, that you harvested or that you foraged or hunted, that is an incredibly fulfilling moment. And it fills people up in a very unique way that you just don't get anywhere else these days.
Yeah. I mean, I love this. And I really love this metaphor of going from survival to success to significance. And you literally start with survival. I wonder if you could just take us back and bring the listeners up to speed on kind of your journey and how you got started with survival and survival skills.
Yeah, so I grew up in Boy Scouts, okay? And the Boy Scouts instilled a love for nature with me very early on. I mean, I'll never forget, my favorite merit badge was the Wilderness Survival Merit Badge. It was the first time I slept in a shelter that I built myself out in the middle of the woods. And it was a really profound moment for me. It planted a seed in me that would ultimately blossom and bloom into something pretty cool later on while I was in pharmacy school, of all places. Oh,
wow, nice.
I went to college to be a pharmacist until I shadowed one, and my life flashed before my eyes, and I realized this is not my place, And so I really thought about what makes me happy. I don't want to spend my life doing something that doesn't make me happy. What are the times in my life when I was happiest? And I just kept on coming back to the Wilderness Survival Merit Badge, of all things. And I'm like, I don't know if this is possible. And I certainly didn't know anyone who was a wilderness survival instructor, but I made the decision in college that I'm going to be a wilderness survival instructor. So I switched my degree to business, and I taught my first wilderness survival skills class, which was essentially the Wilderness Survival Merit Badge. in college when I was 20 years old. And it was a huge learning experience for the next 15 years.
Who did you teach that class to? Who were your first students?
I figured since I learned it in the scouts, I would reach out to the scouts and see if any local scout troops would want to show up to a wilderness survival training class. So I had about 25 people show up to my first course, which blew me away. Half of them were scouts, and the other half were just kind of random people who had read about it in an article. I did a little local article with the newspaper, Boy Scout hosting wilderness survival course. It was on my parents' farm in southern Indiana. And that was my first course, 20 something people teaching. I don't even want to think about what I was teaching at the time. I've come a long way in the skills department, but just taught the stuff I learned in Boy Scouts, and come to find out there was a lot of people who don't even know that.
Yeah. You talked about remembering that moment that when you were a kid, like figuring out and understanding about this badge, and that like sort of that moment that was profound for you. I just wonder if you could kind of take us to that moment.
Yeah. So I grew up on a farm, and I grew up stomping around the woods and playing in the woods, and I built forts and all that stuff, but I never really looked at the wilderness as, can I survive out here? I would always go back home, and there was a part of me, even at a young age, as a young man, that wondered, can I survive in the wilderness? I think for so many people, and I can't speak for everyone, but it is ingrained in our nature. Like, can I live here? Can I live if I was lost out here? Do I have what it takes? Even as a little boy, I wondered, can I do this? And having those little successes, even though my merit badge instructor helped me, building that little shelter and actually sleeping in it and starting that little fire and eating some of those little wild edibles, out in the middle of the woods, it was the world's greatest adventure that I had ever known at that point in my life. And for a little boy who wonders if he can make it, who loves the wilderness, out there sleeping in that shelter, listening to the wolves howl and the moon, dude, it doesn't get any more. It doesn't get any more like, it's just, that is ingrained in my brain, and for many years, and still to this day, I go back to that moment. Like, I went back to that moment when I asked myself in pharmacy school, man, what makes me happy? What are the moments in my life that made me the happiest? And that was one of them. And that decision changed the course of my life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that. I'm curious, like as a kid and kind of through time up until now, how has fear factored into that journey?
I've always tried to harness fear, rather than let fear control me. I heard at a young age, and I'm probably going to screw this quote up, but instead of let fear control you, use fear as a tool. Fear, everyone has fear. And fear is a total natural thing. Even animals have fear. Fear is completely natural. But you can harness the power of that fear to, keep you on edge, to help you make good decisions. And instead of letting it control you, I've always had trepidation when it comes to even starting a business or sticking my neck out there a little bit or doing some more of the extreme survival things that I've done in my life. Fear is always in the back of my mind, but I never let it control me. I always try to use fear as a tool to make sure I'm just on my A game.
Yeah. Creek, as a wilderness survival instructor, is there like a threshold between letting fear control you and you being able to use it? Like, is there a describable threshold?
I think that's where panic comes into play. And in the shows that I've filmed for the Weather Channel and that now air all over the world, SOS, How to Survive in particular, I've had the unique opportunity to study real life survival stories where people get lost or stranded or, caught up in a natural disaster, and they have to survive for a certain amount of time. And there's always that moment when fear turns to panic. And it's interesting how decisions go downhill when fear turns to panic. Almost always they start making poor decisions. And I think that's the threshold. When fear begins to control you, it turns into panic, and it almost leads to poor poor decisions that typically lead to some type of injury, and almost always a worse scenario than before. But there is definitely a threshold, and it's best described by panic.
Hey everyone, it's Scott here. This podcast is a passion project for me because I absolutely love adventure. And it's thanks to the effort of my residential real estate team here in Charlotte, North Carolina, that many of you know as the W Realty Group, that this podcast gets funded. This awesome group of people have unmatched levels of competence and caring for our clients. If you know of anyone looking to buy or sell a home, our team serves the Charlotte, North Carolina market, but we can also help you find an agent anywhere throughout the US or Canada through our highly connected network. When you support our real estate business, you are also supporting this podcast. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your referrals. Yeah, I love that. And I'm just curious, and then we'll move on. But this is just, you've got my attention here big time. I'm just curious, like how you teach people like to kind of recognize that transition point and how to back off of the panic. Like, what do you do when panic hits?
In the survival industry, we use, some people use the phrase hug a tree. Some people use the phrase sit, but regardless of what it is literally, I've come to use combat breathing, which is a breathing technique used by all types of different, used by athletes and special forces that can help you literally calm down. I mean, it physically helps you calm down. And so techniques that can be used to just center yourself and take a beat so that, I'm not dying right now.
Yeah.
So I need to calm down so that I can, get myself back on track so that I don't let that threshold overlap into panic. And so there's a variety of techniques we use. None of them are super exciting, and none of them are rocket science, and none of them sound really that cool, but they're all about just taking a beat and calming down, and breathing physically makes a big difference. It's a proven physical way to calm down, breathing in the nose, counting to 3, breathing out the mouth, and doing that over and over. It is proven to recenter you.
The power of breath. And I love that. Okay. So as we kind of alluded to in the introduction, you and I had a conversation before today, and
Right.
You were kind of telling me that your life's path has sort of gone through sort of 3 different phases, and it starts with survival. But I wonder if you could sort of walk us through those 3 different phases. And I would love to know, as we talk through them, kind of what was going on for you both in that phase for your business, but also kind of what was going on with you personally, because I feel like they're intertwined.
They are, I'm a personality driven business. So my business is me.
Yeah.
Right. And so I can't really separate the two. And so as I change and as I, evolve and develop and things happen in my life, my business just naturally changes along with me. It's impossible to fake it on one side and be Creek Stewart, the survival instructor on one side, but then be a different person. I'm the business. So it definitely 3 phases. So the beginning was really simple, like you would imagine a 20-year-old to think, right? So my favorite movie as a boy was Rambo. And I felt like, my motivation for starting survival skills was really simple. I like being in the woods. I like spears and knives and fire. And because I like these, maybe other people will like these. And so for me, teaching survival skills in the beginning was very surface level, was very superficial. It was just about teaching survival skills. That's what I enjoyed at the time as a 20-something-year-old young man. And, that's about as deep as my courses went. They came, I taught them survival skills, they left, they still had fun. I still helped them have fun, so felt like I was doing a service and, and I was having fun, but it was a very surface level type of business, right? And so my business would eventually evolve, as we alluded to earlier. I started to realize that people weren't really coming for survival skills. They were coming for something more intrinsic, to face Mother Nature or see if they could do it, to unplug from the office, to get away from home. It was always something different, when I would talk to people. And so as I grew, I began to become a wilderness survival instructor that focused less on survival skills and that focused more on helping people have a profound experience in the wilderness and something that could bring about a personal transformation of some kind. And I got to do that on a really unique stage when I filmed Fat Guys in the Woods, which was my first television show. And I took 3 guys who weren't always fat. They were kind of, just stuck at a place in their life where they needed a kick in the pants. And I would take them out into the woods for 6 days with hardly nothing and use survival skills to bring about personal transformation. We would struggle. We would go through all of those struggles each week to meet those basic human survival needs. And you would think that on day 6, they would hate me, but they didn't. It proved what I learned about this teaching survival skills on a national and then now international stage, that survival skills and experience in the wilderness can bring about profound perspective and appreciation and fulfillment, where even though you're miserable, there's something very intrinsically rewarding about getting dirty and, struggling in nature.
Yeah. So for listeners, I want to point out, you've done a TED Talk. And that TED Talk, you talk about Fat Guys in the Woods, and you play some clips in that TED Talk that show like the faces and the experiences of some of the guys that were on that trip or in that show with you. And it is pretty profound. You can definitely see the impacts that are having. There's a lot of emotion that goes on. So I definitely want to encourage listeners to go check out that TED Talk. It was really, really good. Creek, before we go from the Rambo phase, because I love me some Rambo. We're about the same age. I grew up with Rambo, and Indiana Jones was one of my favorites. He's one of my heroes, and love this whole idea. But I think there's something really interesting that happens on this path from survival to success and then significance. You reached a level of success through this whole process. But one thing that I think is really interesting, like I noticed right away when I came to your website, you are a marketing genius as well. You've got some really good business acumen. You've got all kinds of different products and services that you're offering on your website. And so it's not just survival skills, but you've been able to couple that with things that you've learned in order to achieve a level of success so that you could then create those personal transformations for people. Does that make sense?
It makes way more sense than you could ever know.
So I wonder if you could talk us through that, because not only do you have the survival skills piece down, but you learned about business somewhere along the way that helped you, and you were able to meld those two things together.
Yeah, and that was by far the hardest skill set to learn. It was by far the hardest skill set for me to learn. I learned very early on in teaching survival skills that unless I understood business, I could never make a living doing this. It would always be an unprofitable hobby that I did on the weekends and worked a real job during the week. And that was a very hard pill to swallow for me. And so I spent many, many years, 15 years, 10 plus years, not making any money teaching survival, just struggling as an unprofitable hobby. Luckily, I had a passion for it and working with people in the wilderness, and that passion kept me going. But over that 10 plus years, I would have to learn how to market myself and position myself and, grow a real business. So I had to start all kinds of little businesses to make a living while I was teaching survival skills part-time. I had a snow cone business where I sold snow cones at fairs and festivals. I had a t-shirt business where I sold t-shirts online and on fairs and festivals and things like that. So I did a lot of different things to make ends meet. And slowly over time, I began to realize that at the end of the day, I am a content creator. And as the internet started to come really on the scene, I began to take creating content very seriously as a full-time job. And so I began to curate and create survival-related content and position myself as a true professional in the field. And if you do the right thing long enough, you will eventually see traction. And I did. I was able to create content for some very established websites at the time. One of them was one called Art of Manliness. I always mention Art of Manliness because I feel like they were one of the first websites that really gave me a shot at creating content. And so I was able to tap into their market and eventually begin to grow my market, which led to a book deal, which led to another book deal, which led to my first television show. And I teach a course on developing a business online using content. You think a survival instructor wouldn't teach a business course, but dude, I had to become a business expert in order to make this weird business of survival work.
So powerful. Can you tell us about the connection to the Weather Channel and how you got involved with them?
Yeah, so I was already a published author. I was already filling courses, traveling, speaking, selling products. And I was approached by a production company to do the show Fat Guys in the Woods, which I loved. It totally aligned at the time with everything I believe about the business and what I was doing. And we filmed the sizzle. We pitched it around to all the networks, and the Weather Channel said, let's do it. And the rest is history. I did 2 seasons of Fat Guys in the Woods. The Weather Channel was sold at that time. I still worked with the Weather Channel as their in-house survival expert. We developed another show and then another show. And so I've worked with the Weather Channel now for going on, 10 plus years. And they were the first ones that took a shot with me, man. And, Fat Guys in the Woods was a huge hit for my first TV show. And the rest is history. People love seeing the human element, there's all kinds of just made for TV stuff, but these guys were real guys. And I loved these guys. One thing the editors did with Fat Guys in the Woods is I cried in every episode. I'm a huge crybaby. So I cried in every episode. When these guys would struggle at the end and I would give them a knife, I'd just be bawling. I always felt sorry for the editors. I'm like, I don't know how you're going to edit out this cry fest, but good luck.
Oh man, that's amazing. So, I think we've touched on the early part, the survival, just your passion, your personal passion for survival skills. And then you kind of taking that curiosity and turning it and making your own way through that passion, and then turning that into success by helping other people. And then comes the next stage, which, in this case, we talk about this path from survival to success to significance. As we move into significance, this is sort of aligned with this third phase that you're now, I believe you're in this third phase now. Is that?
Yeah, I would say I'm at the beginning of what I would call a third phase of my business, and like I mentioned earlier, as I go through personal experiences and I change as a human, my business naturally changes with me. It's just how it is, and some customers stick around for the ride with that. And other ones are like, this guy's gone off he's gone off the tracks a little bit too. I'm going to go find a guy that, and that's fine. That's just a part of, do you align? There's so many different survival instructors in the world, and people just kind of naturally align with different people and personalities. And so, so I would say that the third phase of my business is underway, and I'm still trying to figure this phase out. It's interesting because I've always believed the wilderness can change people, and I loved doing that. And I found a lot of meaning and fulfillment in bringing about and helping people, based upon what I knew about the wilderness and bringing about personal change and satisfaction. And I always go back to this one point in my life. I'll never forget it. I was on the Today Show. Everybody wants to be on the Today Show who wants to be successful, right? Yeah. It's probably the most watched morning show there is, live in front of millions of people. And I was on the Today Show, and I was being interviewed by Hoda and Kathy Lee Gifford. And if you were watching that show, you would have thought to yourself, man, that guy right there, he's got it all together. He is just, he's got it dialed in. He's got a TV show. He's an author. He's got a successful business. But my personal life was a wreck. It was just, my personal life was a disaster. I can remember in the studio being interviewed thinking, man, when I get back home, are the divorce papers still going to be on the kitchen counter?
Wow. Yeah.
My marriage was just in the trenches. We had just had a newborn son. I was spending all my time working and filming, and my priorities were screwed up, and my marriage was just a wreck. And so my personal life, despite how it appeared on the outside, my personal life was in the toilet. And so there was something wrong about that, right?
Yeah.
The wilderness, despite all what I knew about the wilderness wasn't changing my personal life. And I knew something had to change. I'll never forget coming home from the Today Show, and we had a newborn son at the time, little River. And I was essentially babysitting my newborn son. Sarah, my wife, had gone out with friends, and I wasn't even living at home at the time. Our relationship was so tumultuous that I wasn't even living at home. And so I was babysitting my newborn son, and I'll never forget, man, walking around the house, carrying that little boy with his little diaper and him crying. And I walked by a mirror. I looked in the mirror and I felt ashamed. It's the only way to describe it. I was just ashamed. And I got on my knees, man. I knew that there wasn't any amount of wilderness that was going to fix my personal life.
Yeah.
And so I got on my knees and I just prayed. I was just like, Lord, if you want this marriage to work, you're going to have to come in and you're going to have to do something miraculous. You're going to have to do something that can't be found on earth, because we've tried everything, and you see the mess that we make. And so I just said, Jesus, if, and I grew up in church, and I just said, Jesus, if you want this marriage to work, you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to fix it. And I mean, it wasn't fast and it wasn't easy, but over the course of the next few weeks and months, there's no way to describe except for Jesus showed up in my life. He came in and restored our marriage in a way that we could have never done on our own, and helped us fall in love with each other in just a way that we could never have imagined, and certainly never thought possible. I got to tell you, man, it changed my life. I thought I knew Jesus until that moment. And then I realized in that moment that, the Jesus I thought I knew, I was like Rambo survival skills. I was just so surface level in that relationship, And so that really changed my perspective on life and in general. I began to realize that, I no longer want my relationship with Jesus to be compartmentalized to Sunday mornings and certain conversations with certain people. And so Jesus began to come in and really wreck my life, man. I gave him my marriage, but I began to understand really quickly that, he just doesn't want just your marriage. So I began to understand that, he just wants it all. I gave him my business and my finances and my bank account and my kids and my family. And as I began to release all of that stuff, man, for the first time in a long time, I began to just have peace. I spent my entire adult career chasing all the stuff that should have made me happy. I had written over 20 books. I had hosted several television shows. I'd been on all the networks, all the morning shows. I've had all the fame. I had successful businesses. I was sought after for speaking. But at the end of the day, none of it fulfilled me. I was not fulfilled by any of it. I was still searching. When I went all in on Jesus, man, I finally, for the first time in my life, felt fulfilled. And when he showed up, it changed my life.
You used the word release, and you said as soon as you let go, as soon as you released, then you began to feel this sense of peace. Can you talk about that release?
Yeah, well, I'm a control freak, right? Like I'm a very type A, I can do anything, I don't need anyone type of person. And it was a very humbling moment when I realized that I can't do everything. When I was on my knees in a completely broken marriage, I was at a rock bottom in my life. And thank God that Jesus is the rock at the bottom in my story. But when I began to, kind of hand some of that baggage off, and that's the great thing about my faith, at least, is that, I serve a God who takes that baggage, and who wants that baggage. And when I began to hand that stuff off, man, I got to tell you, man, I never felt better. I've been on all the mountain peaks, and there's nothing that feels better than knowing that you don't have to carry it all, and you don't have to know it all, and you don't have to do it all right. There's a God out there that will take your highs and your lows, and he will work all of them for his glory if you just give it to him.
How do you do it?
Well, for me, it took rock bottom.
Yeah.
It did, and unfortunately, that's probably the way for a lot of people, but I thought I had him. I thought I was I grew up in church. My dad was a Sunday school teacher. I got quote saved when I was 14 years old at a Fellowship of Christian Athletes camp. But I never, there's a scripture that, I'll screw up and I won't get right, but it's easier to go through the eye of a needle than to get to heaven, for a rich person to go through the eye of a needle than to get to heaven. And, I've always taken that to mean that, people who don't need Jesus, it's very hard for them to recognize that they need Jesus. And for me, in the most successful times in my life, when I had the money, I had the house, I had the car, my relationship was garbage, but I had it all. I think when you're really successful, you think, you don't need Jesus. It's like you got everything you need. But clearly, I didn't have everything I needed. I was stressed. I didn't have any peace. My relationship was in the toilet. I didn't have everything I needed, even though it appeared that I did. For me, it took rock bottom, and it was a very humbling moment, and I think being able to admit that I don't got it all figured out, and I need help in this process too, was what allowed me to just let it go. There's the series of events in my life that have confirmed this, the path I'm on right now is the right path for me. But it changed my business. It's the third phase of my business where I'm really trying to incorporate my faith into my business these days. And for me as a wilderness survival instructor, what that looks like is, in order to learn about the artist, you study the art, and in order to learn about the creator, you study the creation. And at the end of the day, I really do believe that, all of this personal transformation that people feel going out into the wilderness and feeling that fulfillment, I believe it's all connected, to the God that made it. If I just stopped at bringing people into the outdoors and helping them bring about personal transformation through survival skills, I think I'd really be missing the point, and I just can no longer separate the two, Jesus showed up for me in a really powerful way, and I just can't not figure out how to work that into my business.
I love this so much. I'm curious how you're now bringing I know this is sort of new, right? How are you bringing this into this next phase for your business?
It's a really good question, and I don't have that figured out yet. I'm really leaning on God to kind of help me, figure out what that next path looks like. But one thing I know about God, man, is that he can use anything. He can use our problems. He can use our past experiences to make a way for the plan that he would love for you to achieve in your life. I believe every person was created with potential and with a plan, and we may screw that up along the way, but God can still use those mistakes, just like me telling, one of the reasons why I tell the story about my failing marriage is that, I'm not proud of that moment, but God can use that horrible moment to help people who may be struggling in marriage or something else, who are maybe in a different rock bottom. I've never been in the business of convincing people to do something. Even when I was just teaching survival skills, I was never in the business of kind of fear mongering and convincing people to learn survival skills or you're going to die one day. And that's no different now. I'm not in the business of convincing people that they need a relationship with Jesus. That's very hard to do, but I am in the business of telling people about things that have changed my life. At the time, a long time ago, it was survival skills, and then it was experiences in the wilderness. And now, it's, a deep and meaningful personal relationship with Jesus is what has really changed my life. And so rather than convince people of anything, I'm just looking for the people who are at the place where I was, who are struggling with a certain issue and are tired of being sick and tired and looking for something that, may help their circumstances. And so I'm in the business of just telling my story and hoping that it resonates with people who are ready to hear that story.
It absolutely does. It's a really powerful story, and I'm super grateful for you for sharing it with us. When we talk about sort of this profound, not even a moment, but this sort of phase that's happened, would you consider this sort of that move into significance for you personally?
for sure. And I'll go back to this, I'll go back to, I've got a lot of making up to do. I spent 25 years trying to amass the things of this world, like there are certain things that people think will bring them fulfillment and satisfaction, success, money, cars, the big house, all of the things that people chase on a regular basis in search of fulfillment. The last half of my life, I'm not nearly as concerned about the things of this world, and I will find my significance in storing up the things for the next world. Those are the things that impact eternity, like sharing this type of a message with someone where it may change their life, things that matter beyond this very finite life that we live. I bought a climbing rope the other day, and I took it out of the package and I uncoiled it, and the rope went all the way across the room and out the door. And at the beginning of the rope was this little tiny piece of tape that held the end from unraveling. And I just thought about that, that here's this long rope that goes on what looks like forever. And here's this tiny little piece of tape in the beginning, and that little piece of tape is this life. And that rope that keeps on going, man, that's eternity. And I was spending all my time focused on this tiny little piece of tape. And I was just missing the whole point, and it took me 40 years to figure it out. I have a renewed energy for business and survival skills because I believe that God can use survival skills, like as weird as it was. I mean, I remember saying to myself, I remember feeling like, Jesus said to me, like, I don't just want your marriage, man. I want your business. I want your bank account. I want all of it. I want your conversations. I want everything. And I remember thinking, like, you remember, right? I'm a wilderness survival instructor. How am I supposed to like use wilderness survival skills to talk about Jesus, and, come to find out there's a lot of parallels between survival skills and a personal relationship with Jesus. But so I'm still navigating those waters, but I'm in a weird place where I just can't separate the two anymore. So
yeah, well, you're doing it.
Who knows?
Doing it right now, and as I think, like, as kind of wrap up the sort of the connection from survival to success to significance, like, again, I love this metaphor that your journey like literally starts in survival skills, but through that you found at least a perceived level of success, right? I mean, and then, it seems like in order to go to significance, you have to leave all of that behind, right? And so there's sort of been this thread. I'm just curious for you, do you feel like you had to go through that whole path in order to get to the level of significance?
For me, yes. For sure, for me, and there were other life events that helped solidify and really change my perspective on life. We had a daughter pass away, which really changed my perspective and priorities once again, and you'd think that having a child pass away would rip any faith or shred you had in God out of you, but for us, it helped us dig in even more, like I was like, dude, I mean, I'm all in, and, but for me, man, with my personality type, I needed a rock bottom, and that was the only thing that was going to wake me up. I'm human, so I still struggle with all the material thing, it's like, I'm human. I'm definitely not perfect. So I still battle that internal struggle with, chasing business and chasing all that and chasing the next thing. But I'm really trying to temper that as best as I can with how do I do the next thing and, use it in some way, shape, or form to tell people about what Jesus did in my life.
Well, you are an incredible inspiration, and all the work that you've been doing, even just from day one, just teaching the Rambo skills. I mean, because there's a clear progression. That was, that's what led to where you are now, and it's hugely inspiring. Your story is amazing. I feel like we could probably spend hours talking about this stuff. So as we kind of wrap up here, let's come back to the beginning and the survival skills. We can't end this episode without some kind of a teaching moment, Creek. I wonder if you could share some survival skills insight with listeners.
Absolutely. So I'm still a survival instructor, so we're still good, you know? So I'm going to harken back to where I got my start. So when I began to really get momentum and traction, it was when I began to teach about and talk
Yeah.
about what's called a bug out bag. Okay. And so if there was one survival skill that I feel like encompasses all kinds of really good and meaningful things, it's putting together a 72-hour disaster survival kit. That was what my first book was about, Build the
Cool.
Perfect Bug Out Bag.
Cool.
And so a bug out bag is designed for if a natural or man-made disaster strikes your house and you have to suddenly leave, you take your bug out bag. It's got everything you need in it for you and your family to survive for 72 hours. And, you know, having studied dozens of survival stories and talked with dozens of people who have experienced natural disasters, you know, bug out bags are such a smart decision. And the cool thing about a bug out bag is that not only can it help you navigate some pretty tumultuous waters if a natural disaster strikes, but in putting one together, you learn a lot of little things about survival. You know, you put a fire starter in there, you learn about the core four: shelter, water, fire, food. And then you're going to throw some tools in there like a knife and a first aid kit. And so by just assembling a 72-hour survival kit, you begin to kind of tread water a little bit with some of these key elements of survival. And so that's why I love a bug out bag. So you want to think about like really 6 categories: a shelter, water, fire, food, first aid, and tools. And if you cover the bases in those categories, you've got yourself a really great at-home survival kit.
Man, I love that. That's fantastic. The bug out bag. Is that the name of the book? Is it?
Yeah, so Build the Perfect Bug Out Bag is the name of the book. And that was my very first book. Well, I wrote a book when I was in college, but I try to forget about that one and hope that it never surfaces. But my first real book was Build the Perfect Bug Out Bag. And that was, gosh, 12, 15 years ago.
Where's the best place to keep the bug out bag?
So in any kind of a closet, you want it to be readily accessible and ready to grab and run out the door with, because some of these natural disasters, they literally give you no notice.
Yeah.
Wildfires, floods, you know, these things happen all the time. You know, we take it for granted that they're just going to happen to somebody else. But I'm here to tell you that they happen to all people in all zip codes, all races, all religions of any shape, size, or form, you know, and it is a survival tool worth investing in.
Love it. Thank you so much. I love getting a little bit of practical insight here.
Totally.
Creek, survival, success, significance. I'm sure that we've got listeners here that are in all different stages of that journey, and everybody's got their own journey. Yours is such an awesome story. It's super inspiring. I know people are going to love this episode. I'm just curious for those people listening, no matter where they are in that journey. Anything, any kind of advice you want to leave us with?
Oh man, that's a big question.
Yeah, it is.
That's a big question. You know, my advice is, I guess, this: we're all in different places, you know, and we all come from different backgrounds and different beliefs and different faiths and all of it, you know. And my advice would be, you know, it's all about people. There's one thing, at least in my faith, that is the most important. You know, I mean, I remember, you know, from scripture when Jesus was asked, like, what's the most important commandment? He said, love the God with all your heart and love other people, you know, and regardless of your faith, I believe that, you know, serving and loving other people can have a profound impact in your life. And if that's the focus of your business, if you're a businesswoman or a businessman, if your focus becomes about serving other people and loving other people, you know, you can't go wrong with that.
I love this. Thank you. Epic story. And there's been such a progression from the Boy Scouts to Rambo to survival, success, and significance. 3 TV shows. I mean, I don't know, Creek, is Hollywood in your future? I mean, at some point, they're going to pick up on your story. So I want to know, when they do, who's going to be the actor that's going to play you in the movie about your life?
Oh, that's funny. You know, I grew up in the 80s. And so One of my favorite movies was Red Dawn. So I love the original Red Dawn, but I
Yeah.
also, so I love Patrick Swayze, I love
Yeah,
Patrick
man.
Swayze, you
I
know,
love that for you.
yeah. So I love Patrick Swayze. He'd be a great pick. But I also like this guy he's more on the down low now. You haven't seen him in a while. Remember Stephen Baldwin from the 80s?
Yeah, I sure
I
do.
love that guy. He's a little bit wild man. He's a little bit surfer. Um, I love Stephen Baldwin. So if I had to pick,
Isn't he Alec Baldwin's brother?
his little brother.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Awesome. I love
So
that.
he's the blonde brother. And
Love it.
so I think I might pick either young Patrick Swayze or young Stephen Baldwin.
I love it. What's your movie going to be called?
Oh, that's a good question. What would the movie about my life be called? There was a play. Remember the play Death of a Salesman?
Yeah.
Book and movie, and maybe mine would be called Death of a Survival Instructor.
Oh, man.
Because I've had to kill off parts of my life a couple of times in order to grow and in order to kind of step into a new identity. And so, there's a fun oxymoron there, Death of a Survival Instructor. And it's very true in my life too.
Yeah. I love that. Sometimes you got to die to survive.
That's right. It's in my life, I had to a few times.
Oh, man. Thank you so much. Creek, if people want to take your classes, read your books, or just find out more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
It's real simple, creekstewart.com, and get on my email list. I trade you 3 of my best-selling survival pocket field guides just to hop on my email list. I'm doing a lot of keynote speaking now and a lot of workshops for organizations and churches and companies. And so if anybody listening is in a position of influence to bring in a keynote speaker or a workshop leader, I would love to be considered for that. So I travel all over the country doing that now.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, Creek, thank you so much for the time today. For those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Creek's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review or sharing and tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Creek, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, man. Appreciate the opportunity.